Chris Lamping here, PHRA's Executive Director. Welcome to PHRA's podcast, P4, People, Purpose, Passion, Pittsburgh. P4 is brought to you by our members and sponsors, Lattice and the University of Pittsburgh, Executive MBA programs, and the Center for Executive Education. We appreciate their support, and we'll hear from them throughout the podcast, beginning with the University of Pittsburgh Executive MBA programs and Center for Executive Education. Welcome to the special conference edition of P4. In this episode, Pete Schramm, P4 host, and Dr. Victoria Mattingly and Sertrice Grice, PHRA's featured keynotes, will discuss how to create lasting inclusive behaviors and the value in ally partnerships.
Welcome back to the P4 podcast. We're excited to dig into two of our speakers for the upcoming summit this year. Sertrice and Victoria, thank you so much for joining us. We're excited to learn more about your background and what this DEI space is, how can we take action here, and what are some of the best practices? So before we dig into all those pieces, V, can you tell us a little bit about who you are, how you got to where you are today, and then we'll go right over to Sertrice.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us. I'm Dr. Victoria Mattingly. You can call me Dr. V or Victoria, just don't call me Vicky. I'm a proud Pittsburgh boomerang. So I was born and raised here in Pittsburgh, went to Woodland Hills, went to Pitt. I was gone for about 10 years and came back with my PhD in organizational psychology and a huge passion for improving the human experience at work, especially when it comes to fostering workplace inclusion. I founded Mattingly Solutions in August of 2019. Couldn't have imagined that I would be building and running a business through a global pandemic, but here we are, and a major game changer. And I even say I don't think Mattingly Solutions would be in existence today if my amazing business partner, Sertrice Grice, didn't join me when she did. So I'm going to pass the mic over to her.
Yeah, thanks, Victoria. So I am not a proud Pittsburgh native, but I have found a new love for it ever since joining Mattingly. I come up there every few months, so it's my second home now. But I live down in Raleigh in North Carolina, and my background is also in industrial organizational psychology. And yeah, joining Mattingly has been amazing. I never pictured owning a business at this stage in my career or writing a book. But thanks to Victoria, here I am, and it's been a good time.
Thank you both so much for joining us. You both mentioned industrial organizational psychology, IO-Psych. Before we get into the DEI space, can you both just give like a one-sentence overview of what is IO-Psych and how has it changed over the last couple of years?
Yeah, so I'll take that one real quick. Industrial organizational psychology, if you just boil it down, it's the science of human behavior in the workplace. Recent update, which is really exciting, is that it's officially a STEM field. So that's really, we love that because people think, oh, psychology and it's feelings, but no, there are ways you can quantify this work, and we are science. So yeah, I think that's pretty great. But over time, it started actually, just a quick history lesson, it started really focused on task and breaking jobs down into what are you doing through each moment. And it was very technical in that regard. And it's really grown and expanded over the years and to include that organizational side. So what are you doing with your people and looking at the people side of things too and connecting that to data. So that's my history lesson for you today.
Thanks, Sertrice. So you just talked about how can we improve the people experience at work, and it's kind of like, so that's what IO-Psych is. And V, what did you say earlier? My focus for this company that I started in August of 2019 is improving the human experience at work. So it's almost like you went to school for this thing that you're now doing, and it all lines up. Okay, cool. This concept of DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, has become increasingly important and very prominent in all aspects of life, I'd say, specifically in the workplace. So can you talk to us a little bit about what is DEI and what are some things that, we can do if we just want to start? We're not doing anything today. Where can we begin?
So we were really surprised starting out with working with clients and just really trying to redefine this space of workplace inclusion and take that more scientific approach. And we were surprised to see there was such a lack of consistency among how these variables are described. A lot of times DEI just get jumbled together. It used to be D and I. Sometimes people throw in A's for accessibility or allyship. We have belonging in there. And so to simplify, we like to say that diversity is how we see each other, right? And that could be whether physically seeing things or how we perceive each other, right? But diversity is how we see each other. Inclusion is how we treat each other based on what we know about others, right? And then equity is what we do to elevate those who've been historically left behind, marginalized, those vulnerable populations to get to a place of equality. Equity is the lever towards equality, right? It's not one and the same. If we give everyone everything the same, we're still going to just be, preserving those inequities, preserving those differences. That's why we have women in leadership programs or employee resource groups that, really try to focus on one particular identity group, like, African Americans or Black population, the Latino, Latinx population. So that's the definitions, but I'll kick it over to Sertrice to talk about, how we advise organizations to start on their DEI journey.
Yeah, so when starting this work, people tend to get really excited and they want to do all the things, right? You see everyone else doing things, and there are some things that are really popular, hot topics. So you want to dive in feet first, but it's important to take a step back and just determine why you're interested in it, right? What does diversity, equity, and inclusion mean to you as an organization? And again, we said we're researchers, right? So figuring out what is your research question? What do you want to address? And once you start out and you determine that why for yourself, then the next big piece to that starting point is to collect some data. It's to take a really focused approach. Again, the data is going to help you figure out what is going to have the most impact in your organization before you just try and start things. So that would be my recommendation, is figure out why it matters to you, and then figure out what data can help you get to where you want to be, and dive in with some data collection.
So that sounds like it could be super, super helpful, but it might take a long time to accomplish something like this. We talked about starting with why. I think every single podcast that we've done with PHRA comes back to that at some point. So it's kind of important, right? Shout out to Simon Sinek for that one. In collecting the data, right? Let's make fact-based decisions, especially in something that can be as fragile and controversial as this, right? There's so many different aspects of this, and it's not one size fits all, right? So I hear that coming through with what you're saying. Sertrice, how long does it take for us to have some of these initial conversations, to gather some of this initial data? Are we talking like hours, days, weeks, months, years? What are these low-hanging fruits, and how long does it take to just get started?
So the good news is a lot of organizations are already collecting data. It's just a matter of looking at it through a DEI lens. And so think about engagement survey or any sort of culture survey that an organization might already be doing. Side note, if you're not pulsing your employees and asking them about their experience and engagement, that's a good place to start. Definitely do that. But when you have data like that employee feedback data, simply being able to slice it by gender, by race, ethnicity, by any sort of identity levels, to see what might be some differences in those data, right? So we get that we have this type of engagement across our organization, but how does that score fluctuate depending on the identity group to these various populations belong in our organization? Of course, that's bigger organizations, right? I know there's probably smaller organizations out there listening. And I think when we hear data, we think we need to do all the fancy things like have the survey and have all the analyses and collect all the data from scratch and make it really quantifiable. And all that's great. We do recommend that eventually, but just getting started talking to your employees, right? If you're a super small company, having one-on-one conversations, just asking people, how they feel or they don't feel like they belong, and asking what others can do to make them feel more valued, respected, seen, and heard, right? And framing the conversation in a positive way. I would prefer that second question I just said over the first one, right? Because it's really getting at what can we be doing even better, rather than what are all the things we're doing wrong. And believe me, if you frame it around what could be doing better, you're still going to hear the things that are getting wrong, right? And then you can co-create some strategies and solutions for improving it moving forward. And so it doesn't have to be this very overwhelming process, although we got you covered if you do want to get more complicated and nuanced with your data collection strategy. But I'll let Sertrice chime in too if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I want to add just one thing in addition to that. So you talked, Pete, about the low-hanging fruit, right? So the data collection, even if you do simple just meetings or conversations, that could still take some time, right? Of figuring out the people and pulling together a plan, and scheduling is a mess, right? But something that can happen relatively quickly is you have this initial meeting with, whoever, whether it's your leadership or whoever's overseeing DEI, and you determine your why, right? We talked about that why, and you turn that into your vision, right? And then you turn that into a plan. You can get that all done within a couple of meetings. Communicate that out. That is the easiest piece of low-hanging fruit that I can recommend to people who are starting, is to, once you have that why, just formalize it in a way that you can communicate it out with your employees, and then share it, but attaching it to a plan. So that part is key, right? Is not just saying, okay, we're doing this thing, or like, here's our vision statement for DEI. And that's where people get worried about performative actions and you're just saying things, but it is simple enough to come up with, here are our priorities, and here's what we're going to be doing over the next few months to get there. You can knock that out within a couple of weeks, depending on, sitting down for those meetings, and that sets you up for success. And it gives you a little bit more grace in how much time the data collection will take. And then one other small win there is just throughout the data collection process, sharing little updates. You don't have to wait until it's all complete and shiny to say something. Taking your employees along that journey will help them know that things are moving along.
And just a quick add to that.
All right, so clarify for me right here. So we're going to determine our why, and then we're going to collect some of this data while in parallel we're developing our vision, formalizing this to communicate out with the team of a plan. So it's kind of like why, our vision, our plan, data collection, and then
we act, right? Because then you have your data tied to your plan. Now you can actually do the plan. And the plan may be some more data collection, right? So that's why it is so important to have that strategy and plan, because it's telling you where to go.
Can you talk to some organizations that are really, really good at this, and that might be, somebody that we could, research, or we could look at, or any other kind of superstar entities in this space that, like, they got this right and they're still iterating, right? It's never a done process, but who's headed in the right direction here, Sertrice?
Yeah. So one organization, maybe a little biased, that I know of doing some really great work in this space would be Dick's Sporting Goods. They've put in a lot of work into having a really robust plan, and not just that, but I think more importantly to me is they have the structure internally to back it up. So that's something that people get held up on when trying to do this work, is they're like, oh, we'll just put it on some volunteers and a council, or we'll put it on top of HR's plate. But HR has so many other things going on, it doesn't get prioritized and this stuff doesn't happen. And so DSG, one of their biggest strengths is they have their IND or DEI function. And then from there, they also have their teammate resource groups. They have their, actually, they have like 5 different categories. You can check out their website. It's public. It's really awesome. You can look there and see everything they have going on and the things they do and share publicly as well. I think they're a great example. But Victoria, you want to add another example?
Yeah, I just have to +1 the importance of having that structure and the sustainability piece. I mean, companies that have that function and have that in place, that even if people rotate in and out, there's always that foundation to go back to on year over year, depending on new data and who's responsible for actually doing the work. Another example, it's not a company as much as a coalition, but we've done some really great work with a group called Baltimore Tracks down in the Baltimore area. And so even though the city of Baltimore is about 70% Black, the startup scene looks very, very different, right? We do not have the representation down in Baltimore. And that's true for the startup and tech world, across the country and nation as well. So, but what they are doing is Baltimore Tracks is a coalition bringing together all of these startups in Baltimore who are passionate and committed to changing that stat, changing the diversity of their space in the startup Baltimore scene. And so whereas Dick's Sporting Goods, which shout out to Pittsburgh, their HQ here in Pittsburgh, but whereas Dick's Sporting Goods is so far along on their DEI journey, this is a great example what companies can be doing to get started, right? So coming together across industry, trying to make industry-wide change, in this case, local to Baltimore, bringing us in as experts to help guide them on what data they can be reporting, especially when it comes to those smaller population sizes that startups are often facing. So collecting a little bit of data, doing those focus groups, and then how do you report that data? And then most importantly, use that data to then do some sort of action, make some change. So whenever you recollect the data next year, you can see that difference in pre-post. We always talk about moving the needle in this space. And so I think Baltimore Tracks is a really great example of defining what scale that needle is even moving on, best practices. And once again, that sustainability piece that, they can now go and replicate this process year over year. So I think they're a great example of what it could look like at the beginning of the journey and how to embed that data-driven approach from the very onset.
I love it. And it's interesting to see all these different circles coming together, right? DSG in the Pittsburgh area. And I don't know if I ever told you this, we went through an accelerator in the Baltimore area and have been growing with Jeff Cherry, with Jamie McDonald, Corey Bailey, Joe McClinsky, and some of the other rock stars in the Baltimore area who are really, really focused on leveling this playing field to bring the right people to the conversations. And how cool is it if we can start small, start early, so that you're proactive rather than reactive? Because what happens with startups and small companies, they grow and eventually they become larger companies. So if we can put the right practices in place early on, we're setting everybody else up for success. I absolutely love it. You talked about ERGs, employee resource groups, employee benefits resource groups. What does that mean to you? And what are your thoughts on it? Can that be a tool for good?
Yeah, so employee resource groups, business resource groups, whatever. Like I said, they call them teammate resource groups because they're teammates. Whatever you choose to call them, they, like a lot of things in the DEI space, they can be useful if done well, right? So another history lesson for you. When they first started, they tended to be more focused on like a social atmosphere, and it was bringing people together based on an identity group and their employee-led groups, right? And in the beginning, it was very social. So they would just go and spend time together, and it was building community. Now that part is still really important, but over time, the businesses, but more importantly, the groups realized the power that they could have if utilized well. So if you give employee resource groups access to data, right? If you give them resources, so you give them funding, then they can be a really large benefit to not only the organization, but to that community, because they are one of the best resources to go to and find out what does that identity group need in your organization. They can give you insight into, if you're doing a marketing campaign and you have some ideas and you're like, we want to do it right, we want to do it justice, getting some insight from your actual employees, really leaning on issues with recruitment, selection, and you want to know, right, how to do better. Ask people from those identity groups who already exist in your organization. But the key there, like I said, they need access to data, because if you're going to ask them for their input, they need to know, well, what's going on now? Why are we trying to improve this? Where are we trying to go to? And they also need that funding, because if we're going to ask them at that point to be doing this work, it no longer can be employee-led volunteer position. It needs to be a position where they're being compensated for their time, whether that's an actual, addition to their pay, or if they have devoted hours pulled from their other work that they can designate to this work. And then just in general, they do programming and different things. So there's some other funding that may be needed as well. So that's my big thing with employee resource groups is they definitely have the benefit of that community piece. And that's so important, building community for people who are like them in that organization, and also a resource to allies. But they can also benefit that identity group to another level, on an equity level, and they can benefit the organization as long as they're given access to data and funding. Sorry, I'm passionate about that one. You didn't know what you were opening up when you said that, Pete. ERGs are my babies.
I know I was talking to Christy Elfelman about this actually earlier today. There's so many different ways that you can slice and dice it. And the common piece that keeps coming back is take action and walk the walk and talk the talk. And if you're going to say, hey, go and do this, right? Listen and see what's truly needed. It's not one size fits all. And the piece of giving the resources that are necessary. Hey, how can I, my dad was in the Army. He says, I've done so much with so little for so long that now I can accomplish anything with just about nothing. And maybe that makes sense, but no, that's not how it should be. If this is a priority, then put your money where your mouth is, right? And put the funding in place, because what's the McKinsey report that just came out? What are the biggest issues? People are leaving because they don't feel valued. People are leaving because they don't feel like they're part of this organization. Well, how can we actually bring the right people together in these different hyper affinity groups? So, Sertrice, if you can share a little bit more of, where we can go for some tips and best practices, of their books out there, podcasts. I read this really cool book recently. I don't know what's going on here. But
there you go.
There we go. But I think you can highlight a little bit of this one. Where can we go to educate ourselves? Because, each person learns a little bit differently.
Yeah. So again, maybe a little biased, but there is this really amazing book called Inclusalytics, How Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Leaders Use Data to Drive Their Work. No, that's one of the exciting things we did this year was release that book. Victoria, myself, and our co-author, Allison, who helped take our IO language and make it more relatable. So I've been told it's an easy read, which is really nice, but it's a nice starter guide for people who are, like you said, starting this, right? If you're just getting into this, what do I do? What direction do I go? What does some of this mean? It's like a little plan for you, step by step. Hey, this is the direction to go, and it gets you started. And something else I'm really proud of attached to it is there's a workbook you can download from the Inclusalytics website that has a worksheet per chapter. So it's, again, just giving you everything you need, because again, we know you don't always have the resources to add that headcount to be able to do this internally, or to bring in someone externally like Mattingly Solutions to take you through the data collection and strategy, right? So that's why we created that book, and the workbook to go with it is to help people just at least try and have some guidance and be able to start this work in the right direction. So that's my biased recommendation in how to move forward with this work. Victoria, I know you have your whole bookshelf. Do you want to give one more book recommendation?
I do. So actually two. So one is, so we talk about inclusive behaviors as the actions we take to result in people feeling valued, respected, seen, and heard. And a part of that model is what we call like everyday inclusion, or micro affirmations, right? And so to know what a micro affirmation is, you also need to know what a microaggression is. And so there's a amazing book all about, I thought I had it here, but I don't, all about subtle acts of exclusion, right? And so that's an amazing book, and it talks about microaggressions in terms of these subtle acts of exclusion. And then it gets at what are these intentional acts of inclusion, which is that microaffirmation, everyday inclusion. So that's my first recommendation. And then another really important area of inclusive behaviors is allyship. So these ongoing partnerships that we form across differences to help close those gaps, those inequities. And Dolly Chugh, C-H-U-G-H, wrote an amazing book called The Person You Mean to Be. And it's all about what we can do as individuals to be better allies and help do this work at an individual level. So those two books strongly recommend, in addition to Inclusalytics, of course.
So in the show notes, we'll add a couple of other resources. So V and Sertrice, if you can share those over, you'll see that in the details there. And let me just pause for a second to say how much I've learned from the two of you over the last couple of years. And whenever you really talk about like, hey, walking the walk and talking the talk, you've said go read these things, go learn these things. Before we got to step one of determining the why, is Pete, go get smart. And that's something that a lot of people in the community have really emphasized and highlighted. So I wanted to, congratulate you for making such a, good impact and a positive impression. And that goes back to how we even got connected, right? Shout out to Nikki down in DC for saying, hey, you got to talk to this rock star person who's starting their company in Pittsburgh. So that's very, very helpful. More information there. This is where we are today. Let's talk about the future. Sertrice, you mentioned how we can continuously improve. V, you talked about working with the data, where we are, where we're going, where we were, where we are, where we're going. Let's step back for a second. You can wave a magic wand. What does the future of this look like in the workplace?
Yeah, I think one thing to step out of the workplace for just a moment and lean a little bit into what the example we gave with Baltimore Tracks is, that's where I see the future going. And that's where I hope we continue to go, is that collaboration, because there's so much that we learn in our little bubbles, but other organizations are learning and going through the same things. And it's taking so much longer to help everyone when we aren't willing to be open and share, right? And so that's something that we're seeing increase, and I hope continues down that path of leaning on each other for support. So there are other things like Snap has the ACT report and brings people together, and there are a few others that are escaping me right now. Oh, Open All is another one that's retail based. There are a lot of things out there that are industry based where you can go and ask each other, hey, what are your successes? What are your failures? What should I look out for? How should we build this? Or building things together and having open source materials. That's the future, because what I always like to say is when it comes to DEI, it's not about what the organization needs, it's what's best for the employee, and employees are everywhere, right? And so if we can share that knowledge, again, it's going to help the experience in the workplace for more people, instead of being afraid of, we can't tell people where we're having issues, or we can't share our secret sauce of what's going well. We want to be the only company doing well. So that's my dream for the future, is more collaboration.
Two quick future ideas. So one is, gosh, everyone loves HR tech and, tech this and tech that. But what we're seeing, and I feel like some of the biggest value we bring to our clients, is that we don't just give them tech and run away, right? It really needs to have the consultative aspect, the human aspect of how we can leverage technology to then make those insights from the data, right? Computers work really, really fast, but all in all, they're pretty dumb when it comes to real life applications. Humans work really slow, but we can be super smart when it comes to how we're taking data and applying it in a meaningful way. And so it's more of a caution for those of you here, it's all about AI and technology. Especially with DEI work that's so human centric, we always need humans, making those final calls and leveraging tech as tools, not as the solution itself. So that's the first future area I hope we go into. And the second is now escaping me, and I was really excited about it.
You have to drop it in the comments later.
Yes, I will drop it in the comments later. It's more to come.
Yeah, I love where you're going with the tech as tools, not as a long-term solution, and the collaboration that Sertrice shared. And how can we give people the space to connect, knock down those silos, knock down those barriers. Diversity is not only what you see on the outside, but on the inside. And something you shared with me the other day was a recent, kind of workshop that you did with people and how they look, right, height-wise, right? So I thought that was a very interesting take. I'm 6'8". And it's very different to see somebody that looks very, very tall, right? So where's the diversity of physical appearance in that regard? Ladies, thank you so much for your time today. This was absolutely fantastic. I enjoyed it. And if you could just kind of close off with, whenever we get to this piece of, DEI and we want to take these steps, I understand I first gotta learn some, and I'm gonna read your book, right? So I gotta educate myself. Then I can determine my why. We're going to develop this vision, formalize, communicate this plan to the team, collect the data, and act. And maybe I'm not an expert. Maybe my team all looks very, very similar, and they've been here for a long time. At what point should I call Mattingly Solutions? At what point do we pick up the phone and call a friend to say, hey, we need you to help us with this?
So I'm going to relate this back to my second prediction for the future, which I just remembered. And it's that DEI right now is a very, very hot topic, right? It's the big trend. Anyone who does management consulting, HR consulting is adding this to, what they're offering. Also, be wary of hacks out there who say they do this work but don't really understand it. My vision for the future, my hypothesis for the future is that the companies that continue on with their DEI work compared to those who are going to let it go when the hot fad is over, those are the ones that are going to succeed in the 21st century. Research shows that millennials typically desire DEI. Gen Z is demanding it. And for those who get it right, and especially get it right from the onset, right, they are going to succeed and outperform their competitors who do not invest in their people the way that DEI enables organizations to have that environment where everyone can thrive. So that being said, it's time to call us up when you are ready to truly commit to embedding diversity, equity, inclusion into your organization. We do not hard sell because this work is already so challenging in and of itself that we wait until companies come to us when they are ready to do this work. It's not for the faint-hearted, right? We need to have executives on board. And so that's another key differentiator as well. Whenever your CEO or chief people officer, chief human resources officer says, we are ready to do this, we have the budget, we have the team in place, or we're ready to build that.
And not
team,
just do it, but do it with data. That's the key. You want to use data in your approach, but you don't have an internal people and analytics team. That's honestly our prime place to be, is people who want to take a data-driven approach, but they're not sure how. Would love to help out.
Awesome. Thank you so much, both of you, for your time today. We look forward to seeing more of you at the summit, and we'll share some more updates in the show notes here, and look out for some more resources where we can learn. And maybe we'll have to put a link to where this great local book is. So congratulations on what you've done. Thank you for how you're helping our community. And most importantly, thank you for educating us on what to do, how to do it, and where to go for help whenever we have those questions.
In a world where businesses are coming to terms with the demands of employee choice, solutions to improve workplace culture are crucial. Businesses of all sizes are doing everything they can to attract and retain top talent during this unprecedented time. Connection to the team, a sense of belonging, and a feeling of purpose rank high in the needs of today's work-from-anywhere society. Sound familiar? At Lattice, we understand the importance team building and positive employee-employer relationships have on the success of a workplace. Done well, top-down and peer-to-peer knowledge sharing can unlock new levels of productivity and profitability to create a culture of cohesive collaboration. Ongoing high-quality connections reduce burnout and mitigate mental health issues, more important now than ever with social isolation on the rise. Lattice is a tool to make internal employee engagement easier and much more impactful for the entire organization. Lattice is a proven, secure workplace solution that is easy to implement for organizations of all sizes. So what are you waiting for? Let's Lattice.
The PHRA P4 podcast was created to help build HR leaders through discussions with thought and business leaders on the most critical success factor of any business, its people. If you enjoy an episode, please help us spread the word by subscribing to the podcast and providing us a rating. We would love for you to take a screenshot of the episode, tag PHRA, and share it with your followers.